at a di they're looking at a diorama of lions and this particular diorama, and the young girl looks up to her mother and says, "Mama, are they real?" Turning toward the glass, she adds, "I'd like to be under those trees in there with them." And this first scene for me set the stage for the memories of landscape scenes you witnessed as a child during your own visits that your parents took you to and your siblings to a place called Circle Z Ranch, which is obviously a major part of the book, and the name. And these memoryscapes are later made into dioramas similar to the ones you visited throughout your lifetime at the museum. So do you want to, can you share with us a little more on how the memoryscapes set the stage for you to write the book and how they came into play with the dioramas that you also refer to in the book, and how memories from childhood came back to you as images when you were first diagnosed back in, uh, I forget what
2000,
year it was. Yeah, thank you.
2003.
2003. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is the memoryscapes were spontaneous images that appeared to me during time of intense pain in a migraine. And they were surprises. They were very different from what symptoms I had during a migraine. They were quite distinct. They were beautiful and alluring, spontaneous, still frames. And as a result of this, I became, of their continued existence and my ability to draw them back into my mind, I became interested, very curious. What were they? How did they work? How could I describe them? And I began an effort in trying to understand what was happening and why it was happening. And that really led me on a path to the dioramas, because in this process, one day, a year later or so, I thought to myself, these images remind me of something else. And it came to me that the something else were the magnificent dioramas in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, which I then went to see and began a period where I compared these images of my own mental making with the dioramas to try to understand how they were similar, how they were different, and how it worked to be a viewer.
And I think it's really interesting, Cece, for the audience to understand that you already have a very creative mind. Can you share with the audience what you were doing at the time and how you lost your career because of
Well,
migraine?
at the images have always been important to me and a part of my life. And I took a lot of photographs and I studied filmmaking, and I founded a company where we did documentary work. And I was used to enjoying a lot of images, and that stopped rather very abruptly with the migraine. Um, instantly stopped with the migraine. Um, so that's kind of my background is a filmmaker. I was a filmmaker.
And I think it would be interesting to our audience, Cece, because so many of the people that are involved with Miles for Migraine have similar stories. They've lost their careers, they've lost friendships, they've lost other relationships. Tell a little bit more to the audience about how this affected you. And you told me the other day, when was the last time you actually watched a movie or anything on a screen?
Well, this event happened to me when I was 60 years old. I had never had a headache before then, other than just what I would call a normal short tension headache. But this was something very, very different for me. I'm not sure. Could you rephrase the question again so that
Yeah,
I?
I want you to share with the audience how it affected you, because here you were in the height of your career And it was such, the migraine affected you so deeply that you haven't been able to watch a movie in how many years? You haven't watched
Well,
anything.
I really haven't watched a movie in a movie theater for a very long time. I think it was 2004 or something. And I am able to be on a computer, not for a horribly long time, but I can watch images on the computer. So it was a very dramatic stop to my career and to my life, because I was in such severe pain for quite a long time after the initial onset. So it had a tremendous effect. I mean, I came to a full stop.
Right, which, we'll get into maybe a little bit more later. I want to shift now, and I want to ask you, do you want to read the first paragraph on page 63 for us? I just want to set this, the scene
Sure.
that, this is to me, was an interesting part of the book, and I want to share my screen, because again, I think that to really understand Cece's book, you have to also um, see the visuals, because what you did from the memoryscapes and making the dioramas, this particular picture, I actually um, had a hard time telling which one was which. So I'm going to share the memoryscape first, and then I want to share the diorama with everyone. So let me just share my screen. Here is the memoryscape of the horses. But why don't you go ahead, and this is a photograph, right, Cece? You want to go ahead and read that paragraph on page 63 for us.
Um,
About 5 months after my migraine began, right there.
okay. About 5 months after my migraines began, I started to carry a piece of frayed rope in my pocket. By then, my migraines were almost continuous. On this rope, I tied a series of randomly placed knots to mark the occurrence of my migraine attacks. And actually, you can see a picture of that rope on page 121. Fingering these knots reminded me of the unpredictable nature of my intractable migraines. Smooth times, rough times, no consistent pattern. At first, these knots signified the headaches themselves, but soon their meaning shifted and they began to mark my use of a growing inventory of memoryscapes that appeared to me during the initial period of daily migraines between January and September of 2004, a time when medication offered me little relief.
And then you go on to say, on the next page, that how did they come about? As I lie enveloped in pain one morning, I saw something quickly appear in the darkness before my closed eyes. In that instant, a tableau of horses arrayed beneath an immense blue sky appeared in a rapid visual flash. So can you talk a little bit more about that experience, and also I think it's interesting about the frayed rope. Can you share a little bit about that symbolism?
Well, there's a picture of the frayed rope on page 121, and I can hold it up and show it to you because it was an actual thing.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have that picture. I didn't take a picture of
But I
that
don't know
picture
if this will,
to share.
if this shares at all. You see that?
Yeah, I can, we can see
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, it actually just was a piece of rope that I had, and I somehow had it in my pocket and tied some knots onto it. And originally, these knots were sort of a way of keeping track of migraine. But eventually, those knots changed for me to signify the number of times and situations in which these memoryscapes occurred in front of my eyes. And it became a record for me of what I was doing, how I was trying to understand them, and where they led me.
And you shared with me that they would just come out of nowhere. So can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about, here you are with continuous headache and other symptoms, and you're trying to write this book and you're trying to make these dioramas. Like, how did you do all of that?
Well, the way it all started was, I think in January of 2004, I was pretty much in a dark room with no sound and no light, and in a lot of pain, in continuous, pretty severe pain. And in a moment, something flashed in front of my eye, spontaneously flashed. It looked like a still frame or a slide. And it just stayed there for a moment. And then it disappeared. But it was really something beautiful and very clear, very focused, very sharp. And I didn't know what it was. I went back to being in very severe pain and difficulty. And I thought, will this ever happen again? What was this? I didn't think it would. And time went by. I don't really remember how much time went by, but it did appear again. The same image appeared again. And on that second appearance, I was able to look at it a little longer, to hold it in front of my mind's eye a little longer. And it was an image of horses in a corral on this ranch where I've gone since childhood in Patagonia, Arizona, named the Circle Z Ranch. But in this image, the sky came down almost to the ground, this blue, radiant, sun-filled sky came down to the ground. And I saw that these horses were resting. This picture that you're seeing is later my effort to build a diorama out of this vision. So this is just put together from bits and pieces, and it doesn't really capture fully the radiance of this image, the radiance of the sky, and the sense of peace and calm among these horses. As time passed, I was able to actually bring this image to my mind's eye again. And as long as I looked at it and constructed its pieces, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, looking at it very, very carefully, I was able to sustain its presence. And eventually what happened was I visually entered the area amongst the horses where they rested. It was like looking into a deep space in the middle distance here of these horses. And once I entered that, I felt a sense of refuge, a sense of peace, and a relief from this pain for as long as I could hold that image before my mind's eye.
And I think that's really amazing, because what you're saying is, that place of refuge, it's not like you went out seeking it either. It just came to you, and you didn't ask for these images to come to you, right?
That's right. And I think one of the main features of my migraine, among many other symptoms, was a loss of spatial orientation. As the pain increased and the migraine intensified, I felt as if I were swirling in a void and things were dropping away from me. It was dark, it was foreboding, it was frightening. And these memoryscapes provided a way to enter a grounded space on this earth in which I found protection, stability, and I was able to right myself. And as a result of that, my mind became free to think about other things, to imagine things, and to experience things, because I was protected in this refuge, which was quite amazing, because the memoryscapes are two-dimensional flat surfaces. They're not three-dimensional like dioramas. They're two-dimensional, but they worked for me as if they were three-dimensional as I entered these protective areas, the protected area within them.
Yeah, and I want to share a picture now of this diorama. I found this to be exceptionally, I don't know how you did this, Cece. So here you are again in chronic pain, and you made these dioramas, and here's the one of Circle Z. You want to tell us a little bit about this one? This is the
Well,
gate, right, at Circle Z?
yeah, before I describe it, let me tell you
Mhm.
how this all progressed. I had the memoryscapes in my mind. There were 4 of them, and I was able to call them up, and I started to try to think about what were they, where they come from, what are they made of? And this led me to realize that they were located at this ranch in Arizona. I went back to that ranch just with a regular camera and found the sites of these memoryscapes, which weren't exactly the same, but they were pretty easy to find. So I took a lot of photographs, trying to, quote, get it right, trying to reproduce the memoryscapes. And that was impossible because they were they were about the land, but they weren't of the land. I then came back to Philadelphia and had these photographs, and I tried to write about them and describe them, which was very unsatisfactory to me, to the words, which led me one day to this discovery of their similarity with dioramas. So then I went back and thought, well, I'm going to try to build them as if they were not flat, spontaneous images, but I'm going to try to build them as if they were dioramas and see if that would make me understand them a little better. So what we're looking at here is a picture of a gate. You can see it. It's brown and it's in the center and it's surrounded by bushes. It's very crudely made. But what it did for me was bring me a little step closer to the actual mental images that I had in my head. And it got me thinking about their brilliance, what they were, how they worked. So I then, in my basement, started to build these mini dioramas just with picked up objects and paper and sticks and things. And I built a series of them. At this time, I was also going to New York, looking at the dioramas in New York because they reminded me of them. The space within them reminded me of the space within the dioramas. And like the dioramas in New York, they had a sense of, within them, they had a sense of refuge, which is what I found in the looking at the dioramas in New York.
Yeah, and I want you to elaborate a little bit on the piece of about refuge, because I think that's something that we're all kind of aspiring to or wanting to happen to us. Again, this just happened to you. You didn't call this up or make this happen. It just spontaneously happened to you. When I was reading your book, you know, I have a history of a mindfulness practice. And so for me, what came up for me was, you know, this creative way of having a refuge and having hope and having a place to go where there's serenity in the midst of pain. And I know we talked about this, you also have a meditation practice. Do you think that your meditation practice had any influence on, you know, any of the ability to be quiet enough to allow this to come to you?
You know, actually, I don't.
Okay.
My meditation practice is a very important part of how I cope with migraine. And actually, the very first day that I saw Dr. Young at Jefferson Headache Clinic, there was a a notice for mindfulness meditation. And on that very first day, I thought, I don't know what this is, but it's interesting. My meditation is something quite different than this. I would say with my experience with migraines and memoryscapes, it was much more to do with finding my grounding in space, in a place in space that then allowed me to feel a suspension of pain. When I'm meditating, I can't really say that I feel a suspension of pain unless I'm in a very, very deep meditation, and then I will. I can say that without meditation, I don't think my healing in migraine would have been possible, among other things,
Yeah, and you and I talked about this toolkit, right? Because Miles for Migraine, we talk a lot about a toolkit because as I mentioned in the beginning, it's one thing to go to a healthcare provider and get a prescription for a medication, but it's quite another when you are really disabled by migraine to have this toolkit and have other processes and support and education. And so you had this for yourself. You had a meditation practice, which is something we do every other Thursday. We have a mindfulness for migraine series here at Miles for Migraine. And we also then offer other tools for the toolkit. So you told me a little bit more about your toolkit. You were talking about the consistent care team, seeing a therapist. Obviously, you talked about meditation. Can you talk a little bit more about that and also your past experience as a filmmaker? I think you had mentioned was also part of your toolkit.
I think one of the critical things in my treatment of migraine was having this consistent care team. I've been very lucky because I've had the same doctor and the same 5 nurses for almost 20 years. That's very unusual, very unusual. But the point I want to make is that for the kind of migraine I had, the consistency of that medical care was crucial to my functioning and still is. Not only did Dr. Young guide me in suggesting preventative and rescue medications and changing them continually as needed, but I had a very strong support from a team of nurses. And that was invaluable to me. So whatever form it takes for you, I think that continual effort with a doctor is very, very important. The other thing I did right away, also in that very beginning time, was I realized that I needed to talk to somebody about this. And I found a therapist. Not Jefferson does have a therapist, but I chose to go elsewhere. I think any place is good, but I began talking about it very early. And that care of a therapist has been invaluable to me all these years. And this person was also a sounding board when I had doubts about medication, a second opinion in a way, but more importantly, a way to continually be talking about it. So I think for anybody, whatever form that would take, whether it's a group at Miles for Migraine, if you have groups, that's essential to do. As you mentioned, I did meditate and I still meditate, and I don't know where I'd be without it. I just don't know where I'd be without it. I can't recommend it highly enough. And I think to get into that practice is very stabilizing, has been very good for me. My experience as a filmmaker, well, I don't know how to talk about that. It's just a part of my life. Images have been a part of my life. And they became relevant after I had this debilitating migraine. So they're really my backlog, my personal backlog that I drew from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing all the resources, especially around therapy, because we know that people with migraine generally experience anxiety and depression. And, not to mention that living with a chronic painful condition can just make you feel awful, right? And to not be able to talk about it. I did put the link in the chat. We actually have we have an ongoing support group. Not everybody can go to therapy, but we have support groups almost every night of the week. But let's talk a little bit about stigma, because sharing that you went to a therapist is brave, right? Not everybody feels comfortable sharing that kind of information. And you and I talked a little bit about stigma, and that you were hesitant to speak about migraine through your writing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, an interesting thing happened to me, because originally I thought, oh, I have these photographs and images, and I think they're interesting, and I want to print them up, and maybe I could assemble them in a brief book with some little bit of text. And my husband, actually, who published the book, said to me one day, "This doesn't make any sense unless you talk about migraine. These images have no meaning to the viewer unless you talk about migraine." And I was very resistant. I said, I don't know. I want this to be about the images. I don't want it to be about the migraine. It's different than the symptoms of the migraine. It's just these images. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he was right. I hadn't intended really on writing anything, that he was absolutely right. I had to talk about the foundation, which was migraine. And for me, it's been hard to talk about migraine. I don't like to lead with that. And it occurs to me now that that is an instance of self-stigma.
Mm.
And it was very real and very difficult. And even now, when I think about my book, I want people to think about the memoryscapes. I don't want them to think about the difficulty of migraine, but actually it's all intertwined. And if you don't talk about the migraine, there's no sense in the memoryscapes or in the book.
Right. And so we do have Dr. Young here tonight, and I'll put him on the spot for a minute because he's used to me doing that. And he is your doctor, and he actually wrote the very first paper on stigma of migraine. And so he's known as the stigma doctor researcher. Um, do you want to say something, Dr. Young, about your experience with patients like Cece and stigma? Maybe just share briefly why it's important to disclose?
Yeah, I mean, Cece's story is a little bit of a potential setup for, severe stigma, because, so much of stigma is tied to what we do and our social responsibilities and our work, and that was just taken away from her in this incomprehensible way. And this kind of abrupt onset, or new daily persistent headache onset of the pain and disability, is, I think, very likely to cause stigma. On the other hand, a part of me says, you don't want to lead with migraine, but you're not the migraine. You want to introduce yourself, as somebody who exists away from their migraine. So it's both, and I think that the way a patient talks about their migraine is is an opportunity to frame their story without the stigma. And I think that this book kind of does that for me. And it's really a story of creativity and resilience and, opportunistic um, use of this strange thing that a brain can do. Now, that's a very much a neurologist's perspective, I know, but that that's what in this book meant to me.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks for sharing that. I want to take a moment to pause right now. And if there's any questions that you would like to ask Cece or Dr. Young, if you want to, you can just unmute yourself because there's not like we have 100 people here. So if you want to say something, would love to hear from you. And I was going to actually do a poll, and I got involved with a new website today, and it looks like I didn't know what I was doing very well. So I'm going to ask the people, some of you that are here are veterans, because I recognize some of you. Some of you have gone through our advocacy training program. You've come to our education events. You come to our support groups. And so if you've been coming here to Miles for Migraine, then you already have a toolkit, hopefully. And if you don't, then, hopefully this will give you some ideas of what we're doing here tonight. So I'm going to ask you to put one word in the chat. What is the creative tool in your toolkit right now? If everybody could put that in the chat. And just put in one word. I'm not going to give you any suggestions because I think we all know what creativity is. So just think about it for a minute. So we've got pictures, learning, drawing, music. Oh yeah, definitely. Traveling in my imagination. Sounds like what Cece did. You traveled in your imagination,
I
Cece?
did. Yeah.
You did?
Yes.
And again, if you have any questions, you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead. Feel free to ask any questions here or share anything about your own. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Cece, how biddable are the memoryscapes, or were the memoryscapes for you?
How what?
How biddable? Can you call them up at need? Do they come randomly? Can you make them last longer when you need them more? How
Well,
does that work?
they came to me in the time of greatest pain, I think, that I've ever really experienced with migraine. And that was the initial period. And they came spontaneously. I didn't know if they'd come back. They did come back. And I exerted this effort to hold on to them visually by trying to reconstruct them and focusing. That high level of focus kept them in place for me. So that was amazing. As time passed, I was able to call them up on their own, on my own. I was able to think and sort of close my eyes and call them up and use them in these moments of sort of unrelenting pain. They were very much tied to the intensity of pain. Over the years, my pain has shifted. I don't know if I've become more tolerant. I think I have become more tolerant over the years, and I think my pain has lessened over the years. So they are somewhat faded. I can still see them, but they're not as vivid. They're not as intense. They're not as beautiful. They're
Wow.
they're still there for me, but they're not of the same hyper reality that they were during very intense pain. And I think during this pain, when I saw them and oriented myself in space by visually entering them, I was diverted from pain. I was diverted from pain. My mind was diverted from pain. My body was diverted from pain. And when they disappeared. When they left, the pain resumed. But they were very consoling as places of refuge. They were a place where my mind, my soul, and my body seemed to feel whole. I felt like a whole person as a result of viewing these images during that time. It has subsided.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, I'm gonna shift to the next question that we're gonna ask all of you. I put it in the chat, and it's what is missing from your toolkit? If anybody wants to share, if you can think of something, anything. Maybe it's something that you would like in your toolkit, but haven't been able to get it, obtain it. What would that be?
I have an answer.
Okay, let me hear.
What is
Uh-oh.
what is missing from my toolkit is patience.
Really?
Yes, I think it's patience, and I think it's all across the board. If I would like in my toolkit more patience. I don't know
You
how you
seem
get
very
it.
patient to me, but I guess maybe you need to meditate more. I don't know.
Maybe I do. Maybe I'll get it through meditation.
Okay, so it says here, visualization of my childhood summers at the beach. Wow, that's a good one. What's missing for someone? I have many tools, but I'm missing rescue and preventive meds that help. Okay, that's fair. Anybody else want to share anything? Having a way to make enough time to get the things that need to be done completed. Oh yeah, I can relate to that. There's never enough time in a day. And when you're having a bad day, I had a migraine day today and I had to take a nap in the middle of the day. And I had no choice because I knew if I didn't, I wasn't going to be able to make it here tonight. So I didn't get all my work done, but oh well. Okay, and then the last question is, what's the last question? How will you secure the missing tool? Does anybody, that might be a hard question to answer, but how will you secure the missing tool from your toolkit? Is there a way? And maybe there isn't. And if there isn't, then Anika says, I actually have to think about what's missing. Oh, self-compassion, that's good. Someone's saying they're not sure what's missing. Someone else is saying frustration with not feeling my best and not socializing with a migraine attack. Absolutely. Yeah, and self-compassion. Someone else is, Anika's agreeing with Heidi about self-compassion. Jackie's saying the missing tool is community. First step towards finding it is coming here. Thank you for saying that. Thanks for coming. You're getting the claps. Let's all of our veterans, let's show everybody how we clap. This is, we clap this way in the migraine space because it's a quiet clap. Oh, this is really good. So Dr. Marilyn's saying that she's learning about pain reprocessing therapy and will employ more techniques. Keep talking to my consultants. Good. We actually talk a little bit about pain processing therapy in our education events. So hopefully we're going to be having some more of those events in person. We'll keep you posted. Katie says, we had a great presentation at my Monday support group on self-compassion on stigma tonight before this. Oh, that's so great, Katie. I'm so glad to hear that.
It was excellent. We had 22 people and they were great.
Wow. We should,
Yep.
maybe we should, so share with us who put on the presentation.
It was much needed. They were two psychology students from New York. So yeah, they had a wonderful presentation.
Yeah, and these are psychology PhD candidates who work
Yep.
at Montefiore under the
Montefiore.
yeah, of a very well-known psychologist in the headache and migraine space. Her name is Elizabeth Sang, and she's been very generous to let us utilize her PhD students. And so they've been helping out with our support groups. And Katie's here. She's one of our support group leaders. So, yes.
Yeah, it was fabulous. So we had a lot of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night people showed up. So it was great.
Great. Okay, does anybody have any, Cece, do you have any last closing words you want, anything that you didn't get a chance that maybe I didn't ask this evening, anything you want to share?
I think that in my case, persistence has been very important, both in going to see my doctor, doing what we thought would be helpful, making a change in medication when it wasn't. That's been very important to me. And in the writing process, I had periods of interruption where I had severe migraine and I would not be able to do anything for a week or 2 weeks. I would come back to it. I would have a lot of brain fog. It would be very, very difficult to begin again. I didn't know what I'd written or what it was or what I wanted, but that those moments that were available for thinking and being curious and working were good, even though secured under difficult situation and hard to predict.
Mhm.
So I think that persistence is important and that there is, my hope for this book is that when people read it, they will see that whenever there's a space available to them, a let up, that it's possible to do something and that it can lead you into new experiences, new thoughts. And that's very important over the long run, whether you write a book or draw a picture or whatever form it takes. I think it's been wonderful to do that. And when I saw Mira that day in the headache center, who I didn't speak to and I didn't know her name, my hope for her was that she would find a moment, a respite, a sense of relief and refuge for her migraines.
Yeah, I know, didn't even talk about mirror, but mirrors, tell us what mirror means and.
Well, I dedicated the book
Yeah.
to Mira because I actually saw a person sitting in where the patients sit at Miles for Migraine, excuse me, at the Jefferson, which was before the pandemic. And there would be, I don't know if this is true, maybe Dr. Young can verify this, there could be 40 people in there. And everybody, it was, for me, it was a kind of a community, actually, unspoken, but very much felt a community of patients. And sometimes we would talk to each other. There was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering in that room. And one day I saw a young woman sitting there who was unlike anybody I'd ever seen. She was so filled with pain, every inch of her body. And I thought, this is who I want to talk to. May you play the cards that you were dealt with. May you be able to do that. So that's why she came into the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, we just have a few minutes left. We did just put the link in the chat. If you can click on the link and fill out the survey. And while you are starting to do that, I did scribble down a bunch. I had to do my own drawing here in my own way. This is what I have to do on Zoom. So Cece's been very generous tonight to donate one of her books to us, and we're going to give it away. And the winner is Dr. I don't know if I'm saying it right, Dr. Marilyn Terrell. Is that how you say your last name? Terrell? Terrell? No.
It's Terrell, rhymes with
Terrell.
Carol.
Well,
Yeah.
you won the book.
I
So
am, I'm thrilled. Can I make a comment?
please.
I just wanted to say that, um, this is really interesting and exciting that you shared it. And I am thrilled to get to look at the book, and I will share it with others. I find really fascinating that you had this and still have this strength of visual processing and imaging and creating and all that. And then you couldn't tolerate it. It was overstimulating. It was painful. And but what you did, you accessed your resource state of the vision ability, and it was a coping technique. It became a coping technique, and you didn't plan it. And but that came from, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I do words, but that's just wonderful. I mean, just how that, and what it did for me thinking about it was that I don't know if it kindled hope for you, but I think when we do that for ourselves or with others, then we have more hope. So I'm excited to see what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marilyn, if you can, I just put my email in the chat. If you can just send me your mailing address, we'll get that copy out to you.
And I just want to show a copy of the book.
Oh, it's sideways. Hold it.
Sorry.
There we go. Yes.
And you can get it on Amazon or pauldrybooks.com.
Oh, well, you know what? I should have put the link in to where you can buy the book. I'm going to do that right now before we go.
Can you explain the meaning of the title?
Well, I didn't know what to really call this. The memoryscapes came from Circle Z Ranch, from my childhood and my adulthood in going to this ranch. That was the earth from which they sprang. But the actual place of Circle Z wasn't the same as the memoryscapes. They were kind of hybrids. And the search that I was going on was a search of understanding of what they were and how they worked and what they did for me. So that was one search. And I guess another search was, because of pain, I was looking for refuge. So I was searching that way as well. Not consciously, really. I wouldn't say I was searching for a refuge. I was just saying that the sense of refuge that I developed was very appropriate to me because of my spatial disorientation. It was an enclosed, protected space. So there was a search for refuge, and I guess relief from the pain.
Thank you.
I just put the 2 places you can purchase the book. It's actually less expensive on Paul Dry's website, so you might want to go there. I put the link in the chat. If you could fill out the survey before you go. We'd like to continue to bring more programming like this to you. I just put the link in the chat again. For the survey. And I want to thank our volunteer here this evening. But I don't see your screen. Oh, there you are. You've got your camera. Anyway, thank you to our volunteer who was here to help out this evening. And thank you all for being here. And thank you so much, Cece, for coming and talking with us this evening. I had so much fun spending time with you and getting to know you and the book even better in our conversations. So it's really been a pleasure. This book is fascinating to me.
Well, thank you, Shirley. It's been wonderful for me to find out about Miles for Migraine and to participate in it. And I'm honored that you interviewed me, and I hope everybody enjoys the book.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and we'll come to our next event. We have another social event coming up. It's on our website, so check it out. So thanks everyone. Have a good evening.